Bonjour tout le monde, welcome back to We in France. I'm Diane, and when I was back home in the USA a couple of years ago, my feelings about one aspect of the living abroad experience surfaced again. Now, the longer I live abroad, the more uneasy I feel about telling people from home that I live in France. Maybe that sounds weird. Stick around and let me explain why. All right, so over the years, I met a bunch of people in the US in casual, just in passing situations. And when it's come up, the first thing in conversation, that I live in France, it's made me feel a little weird. And now 10 years into living in France, I can better articulate why I used to feel hesitant, nervous, even self-conscious when conversations led with the fact that I live in France. So first, I've talked about how France conjures up this sense of sophistication, and the reality is, life in France is real life after a while, and it makes me uncomfortable, almost embarrassed sometimes when I first meet people or a friend or a relative of mine excitedly introduces me as, this is my friend Diane and her husband Tom. They live in France. Instead of just saying, hey, these are my friends Diane and Tom. Nice to meet you, or whatever. Let me back up. And before I do, I hope you'll watch this to the end of the video before leaving a comment. And I'm asking you to do that because I think it's so easy to make a snap judgment or an assumption about what this video is about without listening to my entire explanation and to kind of get a sense of where I'm coming from. And if you don't want to do that, that's cool, but just don't be rude. Don't be unkind in the comments. If you don't understand what I'm saying, you don't have my point of view, that's totally fine. But again, please just remember to be kind in the comments. So back to it. Basically, when it comes up in passing that I live in France, I feel like there are usually three types of reactions. They fall into one of these categories. Number one, it doesn't spark a reaction either way. No emotional response to France. I could say I live in Kansas, I live in Mongolia. It would be the same reaction. It's just a neutral detail and the convo moves on. Number two, they think it's cool. They think it's interesting. They ask questions. They're happy to hear more. I love these ones. Maybe even when they share a story about their trip to Paris and they're generally curious. It's harmless small talk and I'm happy to engage in that. Number three is the most problematic, and that is a negative reaction of some sort, whether it's in what they say in response, whether it's in their behavior, and the reaction is often dismissive, snarky, or downright rude, and they're either aimed at me or even the French. And it's number three that makes me uneasy and not want to even open my mouth, because I've had it happen so many times that, just that people's reaction to the simple fact that I live in France, I feel like it sometimes places judgment on me and people assume things about my life that just aren't true. Their idea of life abroad doesn't match up with the reality. And when I meet someone for the first time, I try to avoid telling them I live in France if I can help it. I'm going to explain why, so this might all sound strange to you, but just a quick note, to be clear, I'm talking about random casual interactions with people I don't know well and probably won't get to know well. I obviously love talking about France and everything that comes with living here, since I have a blog and a YouTube channel about exactly that. That's not what I'm talking about. You guys watching this, you're people who seek out France content and find me and love to hear what I have to say. I love talking to you guys about all things France on my space, on my own turf here. Not on my space, but you know what I mean, in my own space here on YouTube. So I just wanted to be clear about what I'm referring to. This video might surprise those of you listening who have reactions 1 and 2 that I just mentioned. You would never conceive of acting rudely as something as innocuous as just living in France. It's a detail, right? And the first couple of times this happened, number 3, I was confused and I figured I had caught people on an off day, or maybe it was me, I don't know. But it really is a thing. It's happened more times than I can count. And now that I've had time to really think about it, I want to pinpoint why I feel people get weird about things like that. So first, about judgments. Let me say off the bat, no one's immune. It's how we process the world and our place in it. We judge situations, people around us. It's normal to an extent. But I feel like it crosses a line when these assumptions and emotions kind of fuel what comes out of our mouth, especially negative things. And that's when the problems start. So basically, ever since being on the receiving end of a lot of these off-base assumptions, I've been extra careful about not making them toward other people whose lives and circumstances I know nothing about. And I feel like it's made me a better listener in a lot of ways. But I know that being afraid of negative reactions, it's certainly a me problem. I'm not going to skirt that issue at all. And I should stand tall and not feel nervous or self-conscious ever about anything at all, especially not the fact I live in France, right? Not with people that I'll never see again or really be close to, right? So I feel like at this point, Now, 2022, I let any of that rudeness just roll off my back and I laugh at it. I'm confident in my life choices at this point, and we can't control how other people act anyway. So that said, I still think it's a topic worth talking about because in the early years, it really used to bug me when things were, so hard already in France and then people would act negatively, so much so that I'd even tell a white lie or I'd answer a question like this. If someone's like, "Oh, Diane, nice to meet you. Where do you live?" I'd say, "Oh, I'm from New Jersey, but my family lives in Florida." Not lying, but also not being 100% forthcoming. It was just easier that way. But let's get into why these negative reactions come about. And I feel like there's a whole host of reasons. First, I feel like people seem to think that living abroad in France has some air of superiority to it. Like, my life is inherently better here, richer, more fulfilling, and fancier than theirs. Across the board, better. Or that I think I'm special, that I live in glorious, oh so wonderful France, like it's a prize I won. I think people sometimes assume, because they've told me, that I'm out gallivanting to markets and cafes with my wicker basket and a baguette tucked under my arm for good measure, living the high life full of champagne and chic nights out, while my husband pays my way. And in reality, I don't go out every night. I rarely go out. I like to chill on the couch under a blanket and with Dagny, obviously before she passed away, and a good book. I have a mortgage. I work. My life is, dare I say it, pretty normal in the day-to-day. There are pros and cons to every place, but all of that is too much to say in a casual interaction. So sometimes you get different reactions. A big part of France's allure is that movies and pop culture place everything French on this pedestal and a social standard to aspire to, a place with only thin and fashionable women, food that's the best in the world, parents who have perfectly well-behaved children, and the list goes on and on. The French way is what we should all be striving for, the media tells us. And I feel like these generalizations, they've snowballed into facts. And people love France and believe all this, hook, line, and sinker, for good reason. And it's not all untrue. I'm not saying that at all. But most people have no idea what it's actually like living in France because they've never done it. And they're not in my shoes, right? Doing it the way I'm doing it. But truth be told, I love living in France. But it does become real life after a while. And I made a video on that here. And along with this, France has this connotation of being sophisticated and even having an air of pretension. And I feel like by association, simply mentioning that you live in France sounds pretentious. Like in people's minds, they think I'm bragging about it when I'm just stating a fact. And speaking of pretentiousness, there was this whole online backlash, just to give you an example, against a Fisher-Price children's toy. It was a charcuterie, a toy set for kids. And people were like, "Oh, that's so snooty. It's such a bougie thing to buy a toy like this." And in reality, a charcuterie platter in France, it's a normal part of a meal, at least sometimes, even for middle-class, non-snooty people. So many things about the French way of life, I feel they come across as highbrow or super classy, even if they're normal in French culture and not just for the elite, And so by association, so does living in France. So stick with me. I also think, because I've done this for other things in my life, right? People project their own feelings about their own situation onto others, to people living a different life, doing different things. And maybe one day people, want to change their life and they right now they deem yours as being better or interesting. Never mind the fact they don't know you. I don't know them. But just to explain this, when someone's unhappy in their life, I find, whatever situation it is, and then they meet someone who they feel seemingly has a more interesting life, they can sometimes project their own insecurities onto that person. And I told you, I know this to be true because someone who later turned into a friend actually told me as much and apologized after her snarky comment upon meeting me. She was just in a bad place then. And I've heard some variation of this from you guys out there, other foreigners who live abroad. And I'm not immune to it either. I'm sure in my less confident days, early 20s, you're still flailing around. We project our own stuff onto other people, but I do find the unhappiest people can have the strangest reactions. And something else I've noticed is that if you answer people's questions and honestly talk about your experience abroad, like demystifying some of the things not in line with that fairy tale mindset of France that people experience on vacation, or if they come here to live the vacation life for a year and then go home, people will get angry and defensive as if France needs them to come to its rescue. And when I politely point out to people who seem genuinely curious about France that, "No, miss, despite what you've heard, not all French people are slim and fashion mavens and rich, and not everyone shops at farmers markets. And yes, the French do go to McDonald's." People get mad at me and even tell me I don't know what I'm talking about or I don't deserve to live in France, which is really nuts. There's no one way to do life, and there's certainly not one way to do life abroad. And if I ever mention anything critical or negative about living in France, people will get weird and strangely defensive. And I have a bunch of blog posts on that. Let me know in the comments if you want me. I'll link them anyway down here in the description. And I've had such weird experiences after simply mentioning I live in France that, like I said, if I can help it, I don't mention where I live at all. Or I say Florida is home because that is where my family lives these days, so it's not a lie. Or I'll just say, I live abroad, and I'll leave out France and then just say, hey, where do you live? What's up? What's going on with you? To kind of pivot, change that subject. But telling people I live in France doesn't always set my interactions off on the right foot. Would people have that same reaction if I said I lived in Georgia or Poland or Kentucky? I don't know, maybe, but probably not. And someone wise a long time ago, they told me that what people think about you, that's none of your business. And if those people are basing what they think of you off of assumptions that aren't even true, it does make me want to set things straight, And how do I do that? Well, I don't lead with the fact that I live in France. Now, personally, I feel more at ease when the conversation does not start with the fact that I live abroad and I wait for people to get to know me, because the truth is, people you're never going to see again, why does it matter, right? It's nothing. But it'll come up in conversation eventually as you get to know people. And, I just feel like it gives off an impression that can backfire. There's nothing wrong with living abroad in France, but when you've had weird reactions enough times, you kind of start questioning where it's coming from. And this has happened even at the mall in the US, like employees who are required to offer a store credit card, they can be pushy when you say no. Well, when a simple no won't suffice, I've actually told them, hey, I'm no longer a US resident, just to shut the conversation down. And, they see me in the US speaking English, and without being a US resident, without a permanent address, you can't get a store credit card. So I'll be like, hey, I'm not a permanent resident. One guy didn't believe me. He asked for proof. I showed him my French residency card, and he replied with a ooh la la. And then his coworker looked over and smirked with like a snort. Yeah, must be nice. Like something like that, right? It's just weird stuff. Like, the ooh la la, that wasn't a problem. But a lot of the must be nice, it's just weird, right? And I know when friends and family lead with the, hey, they live in France, with excitement, it's almost a sense of pride. But really, is living in France something to be proud of in and of itself? I don't know. Depends on the person, right? And you have to get to know them to know that. And for me personally, I'm proud of all the challenges I've overcome while living in France, hanging on, pushing through the tough times, doing my best to succeed on a path which really has not been easy at all. I lost my mom last year. I lost my dog a few months ago. Life is not easy anywhere. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm saying that life is hard regardless. France is not a cure-all to life's problems, and that personal growth will come, but I feel like what comes from moving abroad has been unparalleled. Living in France has been a life-changing experience for me that I'll be forever grateful for. But I don't see living in France as some crazy achievement or the fulfillment of a lifelong dream for me. It's part of my story. Yes, I love it. But it's a part that had an end date until I met Tom and then decided to move back for good. And I'm so grateful for where life has taken me. Friends and family know this, and I wouldn't change it for anything. And what I've come to learn over the years is that people who say I'm lucky to live in France place a very high value on the experience of living abroad in France. They think of it as something admirable and desirable. And, it can be all of those things. But people don't know about the struggles in a 2-second conversation. Life is not as glamorous as you imagine it is 24/7. Not when you're here, living a regular life, or at least mine isn't. So again, back to the original question, why does it make me uncomfortable to tell people I just met that I live in France? And I think it comes down to this. People judge other people constantly, and I'd rather they get to know me before wrongly assuming anything about my life here, based solely on the fact that I live in France. It's just a small detail. There's so many more interesting things we can start with, but I can't control what other people are going to think, so I just roll with it. And basically, I'm afraid that people are getting it wrong in their heads, and it bothers me. It's true that they think that I think I'm better than them, and my life is far superior to theirs, and nothing could be further from the truth. I don't think that at all. My life's my own unique path, and it's not superior to anyone else's, period. Not because I live in France or any other reason. We're all doing our thing, right? And there's never enough time to fully answer people's questions that come up, so I love when people are curious and excited, but a quick exchange with a stranger needs to stay surface level. Like when you answer an acquaintance's, how are you? With a bland, fine, even if you've had a tough couple of days. It's just, you're not going to get into it, right? And back to the negative reactions, that number 3 I spoke of that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Why do I believe these negative reactions are connected to the fact that I live in France? And there are 2 reasons for that. One, as I mentioned, because people have told me as much, and to protect their privacy, I will leave it at that. And because I used to think along these same lines sometimes. Before moving to France and experiencing the culture and people and the way of life myself, even I used to think, the French were fancy. If you live there, you must be fancy. You live in a classy high life. Ooh, fancy, full of high quality food and very cultured activities and lively debates at dinner every night. I thought these things, right? But then once I moved and experienced France for all that it is, at its best and worst, I realized that my preconceived notions didn't hold much weight, as they often don't. The French are not all magical unicorns. You can't put them in boxes. Not all the same. France is diverse in every sense of the word, and I'll be forever grateful that I've been able to discover that for myself. And yet, personally, in my early 20s, I hadn't yet found my confidence or my voice, and that confidence takes time, maybe even a lifetime, to grow as we continue to experience life and different things and meet new people as we find our footing. And back in the day, maybe I was stressed out about something, not feeling great. When someone would mention a detail about their life that I placed a high value on or found exciting, but something that I didn't personally have, it made me feel kind of inadequate, like happy for them, but sad for me, or even low-key jealous. I admit that. I think it's only human to feel that sometimes. But most of all, it made the person seem unrelatable, like someone I would never have anything in common with. But I was ignoring the fact that I knew nothing else about the person. So I was being unnecessarily dismissive before I even gave them a chance. And guys, it is hot today. If I am starting to glow, it is because it is so freaking hot. My gosh. But I'm not like that anymore. And it's one of the lessons that living abroad has taught me, to listen, to give people a chance. Don't react, don't assume. And above all, just let people be. So in closing, this isn't a huge deal. It's not something I worry about at this point. I'm happy with my life path. I'll happily tell you I live in France. But back in the day, it was something that kind of flipped me out, right? But now I really don't care what other people think about this. If they take time to get to know me, to look at my blog, they'll understand. And I will say, this negative reaction, it's not the typical one, but it's happened enough times over the years that I wanted to discuss it with you now, 10 years into living in France. It definitely is a thing, and I know some of you will echo the same sentiments in the comments. But I think I'm gonna leave it there. I'd love to hear from you, and if you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story time today. And yeah, let me know what you think down below. I wanna know if you've experienced people getting kind of weird sometimes when you mention you live a certain place, or maybe even in other areas of your life, and where you think it comes from, if you agree with my assessment or if you have some other thoughts to bring to the conversation. So with that, I hope you're doing well. I hope you and your family are all healthy and good, and you've had a wonderful summer. Love you all. Thank you for being here, and see you back on We in France real soon. Salut!